Okay, good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the second of a series of rapid response virtual meetings we've held. The first was very successful, happened earlier this year, where we discussed the instruments and concepts relating to that NASA currently has funded to go to the moon. This is the second one. This is the one we had talked about at the LEAG meeting in October as preparing for the next decadal survey. This is really important. Now, when I agreed 6 years ago to become the LEAG chair during this time interval, I somewhat naively thought this would be the most important task that I would have to do, was help guide the community through this decadal survey process. And I didn't really anticipate that we would have the Artemis program become a thing right before decadal preparation. So it's an old but true axiom that no plan survives engagement with the enemy. Nevertheless, this is really important, and so this is going to it's going to take all of us to get this done. The other thing I wanted to say is that I recognize better than most, because I have a young toddler at home I'm caring for, that this is a very challenging time for the community. And it's going to take all of us working together to have a successful decadal for the moon. We have pointed out to the powers that be that the July 4th deadline is a very aggressive one for members of the community. We may not get very high quality decadal survey responses and white paper generation because of the current public health emergency, but the timeline apparently is what it is. So we're all going to have to work together collaboratively as a community to get through this and have a successful decadal. We will all rise and we will fall together. So I'd like to thank the folks at SSERVI Central, especially Greg Schmidt, our good friend, and Ricky Guest, who has set all this up. This is the first time we're using Microsoft Teams for a virtual meeting. So please bear with us if we have any technical problems or technical difficulties. Let me, Barbara, can we go next slide, please?
That could be something too.
Everyone, please mute your phones, mute your computer, mute your microphone.
Okay. Barbara, can we go to the next slide, please? Very good, thank you. So today's meeting, we have three goals. One is to facilitate the collaboration and discussion on the Decadal Survey white paper concepts and strategies for lunar science. We want to solidify the commitments on white paper topics and solicit co-authors and signatories, and try to identify any gaps and needs that we can all work together to help with. We are all a community. We would like a healthy and productive discussion. So let's all just try to be helpful and help each other. We have to help each other at all times be successful. And so that means let's everyone just be respectful and courteous at all times. We will liberally use the eject switch if we need to. I'd like to thank Barbara, Dr. Cohen, our intrepid vice chair, who did a lot of the work. And Brett, who also helped set things up, and Dr. Amy Fagan, who worked to send out the logistical notices to the community. Let's see, next slide, please, Barbara. So I just also like to point this out. I bring this up frequently. We are ready. We have spent the last 5 years getting ready for this moment in time, not only for the help contribute to the success of any notional human lunar exploration programs, but to really get ready for the decadal survey. So we have our friends at SSERVI and LEAG itself have produced a series of comprehensive community reports. Please, can everyone please mute everyone reminder to keep your microphones muted, please.
I think she didn't want us to find her.
David
Ricky,
Osterman,
could you mute people's microphones, please?
Did you bring up my juice then?
Very good, thank you. So LEAG has done a significant amount of work to get ready for this moment in time. These reports exist for you. So as you develop your white papers, please feel free to reference them and use them. and let's all try to use all these documents to try to really be successful. These reports exist for a good reason. Next slide, please, Barbara. So with that, we're going to just everyone keep in mind that only a few days away is a stunning world full of wonder and opportunity that's waiting for us. So we have a very special guest, the chair of the Provisions and Voyages, the Decadal survey effort from 10 years ago, Steve Squyres, who very graciously has agreed to tell everyone what he sort of views as important components of a white paper and his thoughts. And so we very much look forward to having hearing what Steve has to say. I'd like to thank Steve for taking time out of his very busy schedule to speak to us. So thank you, Steve.
Thanks so much, and I'm really glad to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I was chair of the last Planetary Decadal survey. Very interesting job, one that I enjoyed immensely. At Cornell University for many years, and I'm currently scientist. Like somebody's opened a big bag of chips. Okay, so as I said, I chaired the last Decadal, and I will stress from the outset that my comments today are based entirely on my experiences on the last Decadal. Every Decadal is different, okay, or run by different people. They have different statements of task, and so you should make sure that you're following along with what the leadership of this Decadal is doing. And this statement of task, and I'll get to that, but this is experience based on my part. Okay, next slide. All right, white papers are a big deal to the Decadal. They are really the foundation on which the Decadal report will be built. They provide the primary mechanism for the science community to provide thoughtful input to the Decadal process. They're not the only avenue for input. For example, we held quite a few town hall meetings, and I suspect that this Decadal will as well. And at town hall meetings, people get up and have their say, and we would carefully take notes and listen to what was being said. But even then, when we heard a really good idea, we would tend to say, hey, that's great, write us a white paper on that. So the white papers really serve to record the very best ideas that the community has to feed into the process. They are treated very seriously by the panels. Every single white paper will be read carefully by qualified panel members, and all the ones that aren't frivolous or trivial or what have you are going to be read and evaluated by many qualified panel members. I read personally almost all of them myself last time. So they matter. They are the important inputs. They are the documents that the panel uses to make decisions going forward about who they're going to invite to come in and actually present to the panels. The individuals from the science community who are asked to come in and present to the panels are almost always drawn entirely from authorship of white papers. Last Planetary Decadal, we got a total of 199 white papers. I was tempted to write one myself just to bring it up to an even 200, and almost 5,000 total authors and endorsers. So they really matter. Next slide, please. All right, how to write a good white paper. If you take one thing away from my presentation today, take this. The Decadal process is all about building consensus. Once the Decadal survey process is over and the report has been written, it's just advice. There's nothing binding about it. The reason it works and the reason the Decadal process has worked for so long is that with the weight of the Academy behind it and with the consensus of the community behind it, it is viewed by its recipients, NASA, OMB, Congress, as truly representing the consensus view of the community. And so to the extent that you can help to build consensus for what is going to be written in that report, the more you can contribute towards establishing consensus, the more weight your white papers will carry. It's great to have white papers that clearly arise from established community groups, and LEAG's a great example of that. So white papers that have the stamp of LEAG on them are going to carry weight. Sam mentioned at the beginning all these documents that have been written in the past. That's great. And showing clear traceability to previous documents that themselves represent community consensus is really, really valuable. The page limit on white papers, at least last time, and I think this time too, is only 7 pages. So there are limits to how much you can write. But if you can point back to a much longer, much more in-depth report saying, okay, this is a summary of that report, but you can go back and look at it, that really carries some weight as well. Somebody mute, please. Generally speaking, it's good to have lots of authors, but you got to be careful about that a little bit. You don't want to get into it. Make sure that if somebody's listed as an author on a white paper, that they really are an author on that white paper, and that they have made a contribution, and or at least they agree with what it says. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you've got a panel evaluating a white paper and somebody says, oh, well, you know, they put my name on that one, but I don't really agree with that. So be a little bit careful about just loading it up with large numbers of authors. The best thing to do is to have it arise from community groups and demonstrate that traceability back to consensus documents. There's a tendency when you're writing white papers to focus very much on missions. That's only one of the kinds of topics that really should be the subject matter of white papers. Key science questions are a good topic for white papers. The measurement priorities that arise from those. Mission priorities, yes, of course, but also technologies. You can write white papers about new technologies that are out there that can enable new science that wouldn't be possible otherwise. New directions, new focus for the RNA program. Any of those things can be fertile ground for white papers. One thing about the decadal process is that it is good to always tie it to the science. The decadal process begins with science. If you look at the decadal reports, they always start from the science. And so whatever you write, whatever your subject matter is, tie it to the science as strongly as you can. Next one. All right. Things to avoid. It's very important to not slip into an us versus them mentality vis-a-vis other segments of the planetary science community. And I cannot overstress this. It ties back to the fact that this is fundamentally about building consensus. It's a planetary decadal survey. It's not a lunar decadal survey and a Mars decadal survey and a Venus decadal survey. It is a planetary decadal survey. And it carries the most weight if the community is united behind it. A united community is always going to be stronger than a fragmented one. So to the extent that you can show how advancing lunar science also advances planetary science generally, do so. Okay, because that helps to build consensus throughout the entire community for a set of lunar objectives. Another thing that I think is particularly pertinent right now is I recommend that you not fall into the trap of believing that NASA's current focus on the moon automatically means that there's going to be robust, decade-long funding for lunar science. There was a decadal that was done some years ago by the Earth science community. And it was done right around the time of the first election of Barack Obama. And there was a strong sorry, there was a strong sense in the community at that time, in the Earth science community, that their time had come, that there was a new administration that was open and friendly to environmental science, and they viewed that decadal somewhat as an opportunity to kind of load it up with lots and lots of good stuff. But of course, budgets get tight and things change. And that decadal ended up, to a certain extent, being an unmanageably long shopping list of great ideas. And when reality came around, it was hard to follow the recommendations of the decadal because it had made assumptions about availability of funding that wasn't necessarily going to be there. So keep in mind that the fundamental figure of merit for anything that goes in the decadal that has a price tag associated with it is the ratio of science return to cost. The science return to cost ratio was the figure of merit that we used in the last decadal for making a lot of the tough decisions. So always be on the lookout for new ideas and new technologies that improve that ratio, okay, that give you more bang for the buck scientifically. More bang is good, less bucks is good. It can go either way, but keep that in mind at all times. The other thing is, whenever you can, identify and clearly state priorities. In the end, there are going to be more good ideas than will fit into a decade worth of funding for planetary science. And if you don't do the prioritization, somebody else is going to do it for you. So, help the leaders of the decadal survey out by clearly stating priorities wherever you can and building community consensus behind those priorities. Next one. Okay, some other considerations. Everything that the decadal panels do is governed by the Decadal Survey Statement of Task. This is a document that is written at the outset before the Decadal Survey really starts. And to a large extent, what the Decadal panels do is bound by what that Statement of Task says. I recommend that anybody who writes a paper find that Statement of Task. It's online on the Decadal website. Read it carefully and keep in mind what it says when you're writing, because they're going to be bound by what that Statement of Task says. A good example was that our Statement of Task for the last decadal made it clear that our decadal was going to place much greater emphasis on the likely costs of different mission concepts and was going to factor that more profoundly into our prioritizations than had been the case in the past. And that was pretty clear from our Statement of Task, and the most influential white papers tended to keep that in mind when they were written. You will get lots of communications from the leadership of the Decadal Survey as the process unfolds. Pay attention to those communications. Good leaders, and this Decadal Survey has good leaders. I was very happy to see who was selected to lead this. Are going to communicate their thoughts and their suggestions to you clearly. What they're trying to do with these communications is help them build consensus. Listen to what they say and take heed when you write your white papers. Next one. Obvious points here. It's been 10 years since the last decadal. And there was a good summary of the state of lunar science in the last decadal, but that was state of lunar science 10 years ago, and things change. New discoveries are made and a lot happen. So it's going to be particularly important to focus on the new lunar science developments of the past decade and what they mean for the directions of lunar science going forward. This next point I don't need to stress too much because I know it's very much on your minds, but it's worth mentioning anyway. A really unique aspect, I think, of lunar science in this coming decadal, and this is different from really anything that's happened in any planetary decadal in the past, it's going to be the connection to the fact that we're actually going back to the moon with humans, and the resumption of human exploration of the lunar surface. Previous planetary decadals have really been directed almost exclusively at the Science Mission Directorate at NASA and at NSF. But this time around, it's not going to go unnoticed at HEO. And this is a chance for this community to get a message across via the decadal process and carrying that stamp of authority that folks at NASA headquarters involved in human exploration will become aware of. Next one. All right. To belabor the obvious, please try to write well. The panels are going to have to read a lot of white papers, and good writing, clear, concise writing will help yours stand out. Think of it, when you write a white paper, especially one with lots of authors, think of it as you would if you were writing a career-defining paper, the paper of your life for science or for nature. I know that deadline is coming soon, July 4th is coming soon, but take the time to edit ruthlessly. Be clear, be concise, keep in mind the nature of your audience. Your audience are going to be professional scientists, and to do their jobs well, they want to understand what you've written. They're going to be highly motivated to try to figure out what the heck you're saying, but they may not be narrow specialists. Try to avoid jargon. So clarity of presentation, like I said, think of it as you're writing the paper of your career for nature. That's the kind of way that you should approach this. Next slide. That's it. Good luck, and I'd be happy to take any questions in the time I've got remaining.
We do have some time for questions.
I have a question. Can you hear me? This is Renee Weber.
Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
So obviously there's been a lot of discussion about, how do we write the defining paper of our career when we're going through the COVID challenge. And so I would like to hear your opinion on, kind of balancing those two things, because there's been a little bit of pushback on extending deadlines. And I understand that there's a place that we can, as community members, go to provide feedback. But some folks are saying, well, it's just a 7-page white paper. You just dash it off. You get some co-signers. It's not a big deal, versus writing a very carefully and clearly organized and well-defined and well thought out paper that will sort of go down for the ages.
Yeah, that's a unique challenge that this decadal survey faces. And I will tell you that if I were chairing this decadal survey, I would be in very intense discussions with my friends at the Academy and with folks at NASA, NSF, recipients of this report, about exactly that, about exactly the challenge that the community faces in pulling together a true consensus when we're all doing it from our living rooms and our dens. I personally hold the opinion that a little flexibility in the schedule would not be a bad thing, considering the unusual circumstances that we all face right now. If that happens, if you get a little bit of relief on the schedule, that will enable you as a community to do a better job of pulling things together. If that doesn't happen, it's going to just depend on, good use of collaboration tools. And I mean, a lot of the white papers that were written, when we write papers with our colleagues, we're often flung across, different institutions and so forth, and we communicate with one another by phone and email and so forth anyway. So I don't think it's impossible, but yeah, the COVID situation does create unfortunate schedule pressure, and engage with the folks running the decadal and see if there's any relief to be had there. Don't dash off white papers if you if you can avoid it.
Great, thank you.
Other questions for Steve?
This is Peter Schubert. I have a question on engineering versus science. Can you tell us the relative importance of applications versus pure science?
They're both important. They're both, as I said, fertile ground for white papers. The technological stuff, the engineering stuff should be tied to the science. Okay, so if you write a white paper that comes across as a technology in search of a use, it may not be particularly influential. If you can show how there's a new technology that will enable new science that has not been possible before, and you can tie it to science priorities that have been established by the community, by LEAG, for example, some of those documents that were referenced, then you've really got something powerful. So technology and engineering based white papers can be terrific. We received some in the last decadal that were fabulous, but the good ones are always tied to the science and show how they enable the science.
Steve, this is Paul Lucy in Hawaii.
Hey, Paul.
All of the 7 pages is short. So what is is there a recommendation that on complex topics that we really work hard to keep the numbers down, or is it effective to have more white papers that can go into more detail about individual topics?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, what you probably don't want to do is write a 70-page white paper that you break into 10 7-page chapters. I would not recommend that. Each white paper should have a clearly defined focus. I would suggest that the best way to do this is to try to keep the numbers manageably low. To the extent that you can, try to fold closely related topics together into a single white paper that really establishes quite clearly what the community view is on that particular topic. And the things that will help you to do that are good referencing, a good list of references that people can go to get back up to the things that you say. And in particular, I really, really think that this community has done an exceptionally good job of preparing for this, writing a lot of reports that are long and that represent community views. And, you know, having those referenced and having them all be readily available. You know, one click and you can go look at that white paper. At that report. One click and you can go to the specific section of that report that deals with that topic in greater detail. I think doing that is better than generating a very, very large number of white papers, because it's not a matter of whoever writes the most white papers wins. It's a matter of whoever writes the best white papers has the most influence.
Hey, Steve, it's Barbara. What are some examples or flavors of recommendations one could make if you're writing a pure science paper? I really think it's important to study lunar volcanism, because volcanism across the solar system is a really important process. How can I then give an example of you should spend more RNA money, or you should make this a priority when you're considering missions, or what are some flavors of recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, you don't absolutely have to do that. The opening sections of the Decadal document always deal with the science, and they try to present a clear, concise picture of the state of planetary science, the state of lunar science, Martian science, and so forth at the time of writing. So one of the things that you can do is simply help the Decadal panels write those sections. If you write a really, really good summary of the state of lunar science today, that will have considerable value. The words that you write can find their way, the concepts that you write about can find their way into the Decadal report. And then what the report is going to do is going to flow down from that, from the science. It's going to flow down to RNA priorities, measurement objectives, mission priorities, and so forth. So there's nothing wrong with a white paper that simply, clearly states what is the consensus view on the state of the science. And it's going to be a good idea where you can. I stated this earlier. It's a good idea where you can to state priorities. So let's say that you were writing one on lunar volcanism. You devote 5 out of your 7 pages to a really concise, kind of like a good review article on where things stand today, with emphasis particularly on the findings of the last 10 years. And then the last page or two you might devote to, priorities for measurements that would address some of the open questions. So here's the state of the knowledge, here's the knowledge gaps, here's the questions that are open, here are some measurements that would help to fill in those gaps, something like that.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Hi, Steve. This is Clive. Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. Question I have is about the last time talking about human exploration in terms of a planetary science decadal. Right now, this is in focus for the moon. And I remember last time there had to be a sort of bit of a tightrope between what could be said and what couldn't be said. And can you give your experience in dealing with that? How should we as a community approach that? Yeah, I mean,
last time while we wrote some words in our Decadal report about the interface between SMD and what goes on there and NASA human exploration, the future was sufficiently cloudy. The emphasis certainly wasn't on the moon at the time. We were writing it sort of in the absence of a clear direction and clearly focused program. There was a lot of talk about asteroids at the time. And so what we wrote, I'd have to say, was not, in the end, one of the more influential sections of the Decadal report that we wrote. That, I think, is going to be dramatically different this time. Artemis is as real as anything that we've seen in a very long time. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars being spent right now. And you have an opportunity. This is an important opportunity. You have an opportunity in a document that will carry the full weight of the Decadal survey and the national academies behind it. You have a chance to establish science priorities for surface exploration of the moon by humans, and that's not an opportunity to pass up. So I think. Sorry, I got it. So I think that taking full advantage of that with this Decadal, I think this is a really unique opportunity and something that this group, this community should focus very strongly on. And look at the statement of task, see what it says about that. Listen to your leadership, listen to the leaders of the Decadal survey, and I'm sure they'll have guidance to give you on the subject. It's a very different situation from the one that we were in. So I think that the best advice you're going to get from that subject is not going to be from me, the chair of the last Decadal, when this kind of thing was not going on, but from the co-chairs of the current Decadal, and from the statement of task of the current Decadal.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Appreciate that.
Okay, thanks, Steve. We're going to move on to talking about this Decadal survey with David Smith from the National Academies, who is the study director for this Decadal survey. So welcome, David.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep, 5 by 5.
Okay, good. Well, it's a pleasure to speak to you today. I believe this is the first time I've actually ever spoken to the League. I think it's one of the few AGs I've never made a presentation to, the other one being MAPSIT. So can I have my next slide, please? Okay, so Steve emphasized that the statement of task is the key document for the Decadal survey. You can find it at the Decadal survey website, and it's written there, and it's written every other places in the presentation. It's the guiding document for the survey. It outlines exactly what the sponsors, in this case NASA and NSF, want the Decadal survey committee to do, and the Decadal survey commits to do no more and no less than is specified in the statement of task. So the website, as I said, contains the statement of task, but it also contains a couple of other items which aren't binding on the survey committee, but they're more in the form of advice. It would be good if you took note of these things. So they go into the heading of things like scope, considerations, approach. The scope basically defines the boundary conditions. The considerations talk about how, in some cases, how best to frame recommendations to NASA or to NSF. And the approach talks more about the breakdown of the survey committee, how big it should be, how many panels there could be, et cetera, et cetera. But again, the stuff not in the statement of task, the scope, considerations, approach is advice. It's not binding, but there's important stuff in there. So if you're thinking about writing a white paper, don't just read the statement of task itself, but take a look at that other stuff, because particularly the boundary conditions to other disciplines, it doesn't make sense to write something which is outside the scope of the task the survey committee has been given. The next slide, please. I think you jumped one. Can you go back? Okay, no, sorry. Go forward again. Okay, good. So what's the same as last time? And there's a lot of the things Steve mentioned. We give a broad overview of the relevant disciplines, a survey of current state of knowledge, inventory of top-level questions and research activities, recommendations on optimum balance. This is particularly important. What should be the balance between space-based activities and ground-based activities, between large, medium, small, and even smaller spacecraft missions. We talk about infrastructure, technology needs, and then we end up with the thing that most people concentrate on, the identification and ranking of the large and medium space missions that it would be nice to have in the next decade. Now, remember, we only prioritize things in Planetary that's new frontiers or larger. We don't prioritize discovery missions. We might say good things about discovery missions. We might say general things about the scope and the conduct of the discovery program and smaller activities, but we don't specify what missions should fly. And similarly, we don't specify what the research programs should contain, how they're organized. Next, please. Okay, so there are some things in the statement of tasks that are quite different from last time. There's a much higher priority to astrobiology and to planetary defense. In fact, remember the name of the survey, it's the Decadal Survey on Planetary Science and Astrobiology. So expect astrobiology to figure much more prominently this time than it did last time. We've been asked to have a closer traceability between the things we're recommending and the top level goals and objectives and the subsidiary goals and objectives. Steve's Decadal survey had some very important decision rules that proved crucial in the past 10 years to give us the program we have today. And so we've been asked to make sure that we have clear, concise, and actionable decision rules on how the advice of the survey should be interpreted if something in the background, like the budget changes, it goes up, it goes down, as new technology develops. Please mute your phones. We have, again, an awareness of the human exploration activities undertaken by NASA and international partners. Again, it's a bigger emphasis than last time. There is another thing as cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, interagency cooperation, inter-directorate at NASA cooperation between other federal agencies, between federal agencies and commercial sector. These are all big things at the moment, particularly in NASA. And so there will be more of a flavor of that in the survey. And then finally, there's a consideration of issues related to the state of the profession. So next, please. Okay, so I took a look this morning to see if there was any very specific language of direct relevance to the LEAG. And there are really just two things, not in the statement of task, but in the considerations. The specific language saying that Mars and the Moon should be integrated with the rest of the solar system. That's nothing new. It was the same last time around. But there is this item 4, which says we should include a discussion of potential opportunities for conducting planetary science investigations involving humans in situ and the relative value of human-tended investigations to those performed solely robotically. These would be really important things for white papers to come in. The typical committee members are scientists, technologists. We don't really have deep roots into the human exploration community. The League does. And so I really hope we do get some good white papers on these topics, because they will be very, very useful to the survey committee. Next, please. So in case you missed the announcement on Monday, we have now selected and appointed officially the co-chairs. So we'll have Robin Canup, from Southwest Research Institute, and Phil Christensen from Arizona State University. So Robin did not play a role in the last decadal survey, but Phil did. He chaired the Mars panel last time around. Next, please. And we're very happy to have them both. One thing we're putting a greater emphasis on this time is activities for early career professionals. We've held 2 early career events so far. 27th of March, we had one basically introducing decadal surveys to people who may not have been interested in such things last time. And then we had another one a few weeks ago, which we informally called White Papers 101. We had 350 participants in that. One of the key speaker was actually Phil Christensen himself, and we had 4 other people who participated in past surveys, either as white paper recipients, i.e. they played a role in the survey committee, or people who wrote white papers. Now, both of those 2 earlier career events were recorded and they're available. I particularly commend the second one to people thinking about writing white papers, because we had it was an hour and a half long, and we had questions. We had 80 questions, and I think we got through about a half to a third of them. We plan another early career event probably in June, but we haven't worked out the details yet. I'll remind early career participants that anybody can write a white paper on any topic relevant to the statement of task. It doesn't need to be my favorite mission, my favorite technology, or my favorite science goal. It could be about the state of the profession. It could be about the human exploration activities I mentioned a few minutes ago. If it's mentioned in the statement of task and it doesn't fall outside the bounds of the items discussed in scope and considerations, then please write a white paper about it. We have at the moment, I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. We have at the moment a full-time job going at the Space Studies Board. This is for somebody who will work on the decadal survey with me and my colleagues. They won't work exclusively on it. The URL for the job ad is given there. We're looking for somebody maybe who just graduated with their PhD, but doesn't necessarily need to be, but that would be the preferred candidate. Once we get the meeting date set, we'll start to recruit some note takers. Typically, these are graduate students who will take notes. The advantage for them taking these notes is twofold. First of all, we pay, and secondly, you will get to see an inside view of how one of the decadal survey panels or the steering group actually works, because you'll be taking notes not just in the public sessions, but private sessions. But we'll make you sign a non-disclosure agreement, so the private stuff will remain private. We have an intern program which we will be which we run every year, twice a year, summer and autumn. Our summer intern program is already booked, but we'll be taking applications for the autumn program, which is open to undergraduates and graduate students for another week or 2. Those interns will work again on a range of projects, but they will have insider ringside seats at the decadal survey, and it's the meetings that will take place later this year. We pay the interns. It's a paid position. There's also at the academy level the Christine Mazayan Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program, This is for grad students and people within 5 years of completing their PhDs. It's a pretty prestigious program. I again encourage somebody who wants an insider view of a survey to apply for that, and make sure when they apply, they specify they want to work for the Space Studies Board, because if they specify some other board, they'll be working on something boring, like for the Transportation Research Board. The Christine Mazayan Fellows get paid a stipend. Next, please. So this is the schedule as it currently stands. We officially began on the 20th of March when we received the funding from NASA. The nomination website was open until May 1st. We received 300 plus nominations. There are some duplicates. Some people prove very popular and were nominated multiple times, but there's at least 300 unique nominations, and we're going to start looking at those over the next days to weeks as we start to populate the steering group and the panels. We had the early career event, I mentioned that. The co-chairs were announced. Coming for the future, I'm hoping that in June sometime we will make some sort of announcement about the panel structure. We hope to start appointing the steering group members and the panel chairs in June. Whether they'll become public in June, that's TBD, because the appointment process at the Academies is rather complicated, and it involves multiple layers in the hierarchy. And while we may be working all day long and all night long to get things done, our colleagues at higher levels in the institution may not be. We have the white paper deadline on the 4th of July. I'll mention a bit more about that in a minute. We hope to have the first meeting of the steering group August-ish, maybe to late August. And then I hope the panels will begin to meet in September. So these are likely to be, at the moment, I would guess these will be virtual meetings rather than in person. But we hope eventually to have in-person meetings. In terms of next year and beyond, we're aiming to have a complete draft of the survey committee report written early in the fourth quarter of 2021. Then go out to review. The review process is complicated. It's like peer review for a journal, but we have a lot more reviewers. Steve had reviews from, I believe it was 18 individuals last time, and I don't think we'll have fewer this time. The plan is to deliver the survey report by the end of the first quarter of 2022, and our contract with NASA runs until March of 2023, and that's to allow for an extended dissemination period. Though I would imagine that most of the dissemination activities will be done in the first few months after the release of the survey report, but there will be funds left, minimal funds probably, to continue doing some low-level dissemination through into 2023. Next slide, please. Okay, the white paper deadline. So why 4th of July? This deadline is not arbitrary. The survey report must be delivered to NASA and NSF by the 31st of March 2022. We've had multiple discussions with NASA on this and discussions internally. Our contract with NASA says deliver by the 31st of March. Now, those of you who had heard presentations on the survey at the AGU meeting last year, or the DPS meeting last year, would have heard that we were going to appoint the chairs in March, and we were going to have the white paper deadline in May. And that didn't happen for a variety of reasons, including the current health emergency. So we pushed the deadline back as far as we possibly can to July. Why July? To deliver a report to NASA and NSF at the end of March 2022, we need to start work this summer. We need to have the first meetings in August. And the survey committee needs 4 to 6 weeks to digest the white papers, the panel similarly. So therefore, we need to get the white papers in at the beginning of July. If NASA wants to give us some relief, or NSF, some relief on that 31st of July, 31st of March 2022 deadline, then we will do that. We'll slip it. But so far, NASA has not been willing to slip that deadline. And why don't they want to slip it? Basically because if they have the results of the survey by the end of March 2022, they can use the results and the conclusions, recommendations in the survey to develop their budget submission to OMB for fiscal year 2024. So this is the budget the president will announce in February 2023. If NASA can't build the survey results into that budget submission, then basically the impact of the survey gets pushed off for maybe as much as a year. So next slide, please. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'll try and answer any questions.
Thanks, David. I bet we have a lot of questions.
I don't doubt it.
Anyone want to start?
This is Peter Squyres. Does a shorter paper make the reviewers happier?
A shorter paper, you mean a shorter white paper?
Is brevity important or is thoroughness more important?
In the white papers?
Yes, sir.
Yes. I mean, you need to get your idea across. If the idea is of interest, then there is a high possibility that the author will be invited to make a presentation to the steering group or to one of the panels. But you know, there are no metrics applied to white papers. Some people seem to think that the more authors you have, the more weight your white paper will be given. You know, having 500 endorsers with 6 co-authors, 6 authors, or 6 authors with 5 endorsers, it doesn't make a difference. It's the ideas in the white paper that are key. Any more questions?
David,
Okay.
this is Clive
ahead,
Neal. Just
Clive.
a quick one at the end here.
Yeah.
So the deadline that we're up against, I understand that the white paper deadline is slipped, but this is a NASA requirement now in order to get that get the Decadal into the budget as soon as possible. That's the explanation that we've been given from, you know, it talked to NASA about this, and NASA, we've talked to Laurie Glaze about extending the white paper deadline.
The deadline, the 4th of July deadline is the deadline that we have set at the National Academies. And that deadline is set by basically working back from when we have to deliver the report. So if the report is to be delivered at the end of March 2022, we need to start work in August. And that is based on experience with the 2 previous planetary decadals and the numerous other studies we do for NASA. There is certain things that are incompressible. There are 2 things that are really incompressible in decadal survey. And one of them is unique to planetary, and that is that the planetary surveys, unlike the surveys done in the other space sciences, also commission mission studies to fill in the gaps between what has been proposed in white papers or being done by NASA. So you'll all be aware of the PMCS studies that NASA has undertaken to prime the pump, as it were, for the decadal surveys. There's 11 of those. Laurie has promised us funding for the survey to do maybe another 10 or so to fill in gaps between what we get and what's been done and what we might think needs to be done. So those
Yeah.
studies take months to do. The other thing is the cost and technical evaluations that the missions have to undergo prior to us recommending them in the survey. So this is done by an external contractor. That was done by the Aerospace Corporation last time. We have a legal requirement to do this. That takes months and months and months as well. So we have these two incompressible things, and then the survey committee and its panels and their meeting schedule is the sort of the free variable. And so when we push back our deadlines for the first meetings or the receipt of white paper, the thing that gets compressed is the time the committee has to do work and the staff has to do response to review and things like that. So far I've given up 6 weeks of my margin because of the delays in getting started. And so if we want to, if we want to push deadlines back, then our delivery date has to slip because we can't legitimately compress anymore.
Yeah, understood that. I just noticed that the 4th of July is a Saturday.
Yeah.
So is it actually going to be midnight Saturday, or is it going to be Monday when you can?
We don't switch those things off immediately. So
okay.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to
Message
keep it open until the beginning of August.
No, I understood. Message received.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir.
And then one thing, please. I don't want everybody to try and submit the white papers right on the deadline or close to it. The nominations that came in for the membership, we had 300 or so of those. 400 of those. 340 of those. Fully a third to a half came in on the deadline. And it caused all sorts of problems with our website. So if everybody tries to submit the white papers on the 4th of July, I am sure our website will crash. So please spread them out. There's no advantage to being the first or the last to submit. Okay, any more?
Okay, thank you so much, David. We really appreciate you being here.
Okay.
All right, thank you, everyone. We are just going to jump into our white paper presentations. So the rest of this meeting is going to be devoted to people who volunteered to talk about their white papers in preparation. This is a facilitation procedure that we're trying to do here. Anyone is welcome to write their own white paper, even if you didn't submit it here, even if you haven't even started it. You're all welcome to write your own white papers, and you're encouraged to do that. Find your own collaborators. Put in the things, the ideas that you think are important to you and to the community. These are people who have volunteered their time today to tell you about what they're writing. And if you are interested in this topic, you're welcome to contact the first author to make a contribution or to become a signatory to the papers that you see here. You also saw on the listserv that there is a LEAG Google Doc that has some white paper titles listed there. You're welcome to contact those first authors as well. People who are writing white papers as first authors, we want you to be cognizant that not all of your colleagues have the time or the capacity to do heavy lifting right now because we've been talking about this COVID situation. So please welcome your signatories with open arms. If someone has a similar idea to yours and wants to just add it to yours, please try to work those out. That's a great way for us to bring in all of our voices in our community and have them have a chance to contribute without having to do all the heavy lifting themselves. So that's what we're trying to facilitate today.